Is it me or has the iPhone 15 launch been one of the most buggy iPhone launches in recent history? In fact, this iPhone 15 Pro Max has been fantastic in a lot of ways, but there have been a lot of little bugs that have been getting in the way. Now, thankfully, a lot of them have been fixed, but I know some people are still dealing with certain bugs, and I hope they get fixed soon. I'm gonna start off with what I really like about this phone. Like, compared to the iPhone 14 Pro Max last year, the 10% reduction in weight doesn't seem like a lot on paper, but every time I pick up the previous iPhone 14 Pro Max, you feel how much lighter the 15 Pro Max is in your hand. It just feels like a more airy phone. Now, obviously, I would love this phone to be even lighter because lighter is better, at least to me, especially when you're using a bigger display. But the other thing that affected me a lot was the rounded edges of the design. It just feels a lot more comfortable to hold in the hand. They're not as sharp. It just kind of goes into your palm properly. But I think the biggest surprise to me was how much I'd appreciate the action button. I know this is a simple thing. I know there's a lot of Android phones where you can bind buttons. It's pretty standard for those guys. But the way this action button feels has been done right. Like the click, the longer press, so you don't accidentally touch it. The fact that I can bind anything I want to it has made my life easier. Like I use the flashlight a lot. I use it at night because sometimes I'll turn off all the lights in the house and I go up the stairs and I want to have a light so I don't step on a cat. I'll bind it to the flashlight so that I can see exactly where I'm going. I do wish they'd allow you to use the action button for more than one thing. So maybe like double click it for another procedure. But if they put like 10 action buttons on this phone, I wouldn't complain. The speakers sound fantastic. In fact, I think they're actually a little bit louder compared to last year's model. But I did notice that the sides or the edges of the phone, they do get dirty like the previous iPhone 14 Pro Max, but you can't notice it as much, especially on the titanium model. Like look at the stainless steel on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. It looks very dirty compared to the titanium version. It's still dirty, like you can see fingerprints on it, but they're not as noticeable. USB-C has been great. Again, standard on Android phones, but I'm glad it's here. I don't really use it a lot unless it's like for connecting an external drive to it so I can record ProRes log. But the fact that all my cables are starting to get consolidated is a big deal. Like in my household, only 2 people now are using Lightning. My wife, who has an iPhone 14 Pro, and my daughter, who has a regular iPad with Lightning. So as soon as those go, USB-C is gonna be everywhere. Back to Apple Log for a second. I didn't realize how much I'd appreciate filming in log. Now this is not for everybody because the iPhone does shoot great video, but I don't like the HDR look that the iPhone takes sometimes. Sometimes it's a bit too aggressive. You can tell when the video is being shot with an iPhone, and the fact that I can use my own colors or a LUT is a big deal. Like it takes footage that looks like everything else and makes it your own. And sometimes it looks so good that I can like sneak it in with my camera, my normal camera, and no one really notices it. Speaking of the camera, it's great. You know, like it's a solid camera system. It's a little bit sharper, a little bit cleaner than the 14 Pro Max. I'm not seeing a big difference there. Like if you have the 14 Pro Max, there's really nothing to get jealous about in terms of the picture quality. The 5x telephoto lens, it's nice to have. Am I using it a lot? No, I don't really use it that often. In fact, sometimes the most I use is 2x zoom. But the one thing that I do like is the fact that I can quickly switch between 24, 28, and 35 millimeters using the wide lens. Look, it just allows you to frame up your shot the way you want to. You know, like I like taking photos with a 35 millimeter lens, and the fact that I can just like tap on it on my iPhone, get the proper frame, take the picture, it's a convenience thing. It's mostly software, which kind of begs the question why they're not bringing it down to the 14 Pro Max, considering it also has a 48 megapixel camera, but it's a nice thing to have. Now, with all the things that I love out of the way, we gotta talk about some of the bugs that were present with this phone on launch and some of the things that were affecting my experience. But before I do, a quick message from today's sponsor. HP has a massive selection of repair-friendly laptops to choose from. In fact, they dedicated an entire YouTube channel with thousands of videos created to help you upgrade, replace, and maintain select HP laptops like this HP EliteBook 845G9. The process of upgrading my SSD was extremely simple. With no proprietary tools needed, I was able to use a normal Phillips head screwdriver remove the bottom lid, and easily swap out my SSD by following the SSD chapter in their HP support video. It's unbelievable how detailed these videos are, often spanning up to 1 hour and focusing on the majority of components. Being able to upgrade and repair your laptop is your right. Make sure to click on the link below to learn more. Now, the first issue I had with this phone, at least for the first week or so, was the fact that the battery was draining like crazy. It was bad. You know, this is a 14 Pro Max. This is the device you buy if you want the bigger display and the better battery. And it was acting like a 14 Pro from last year. You know, I would start the day and then end it with like 30% or 20% battery life, which is unheard of. Usually, like, I'm a light to medium user. I'd usually end the day with like 60% before needing to charge. But there were apps in the background that were draining it. Instagram was a big culprit, and this was an issue because of iOS 17. And of course, they did update it, and it has been fixed, and the battery life has gotten better. But compared to like the 13 Pro Max or the 12 Pro Max, the battery life just hasn't been as good. Thankfully, my battery health percentage, or capacity rather, is still at 100%. I will report back in about 6 months to a year to see where it is then. But I'm hoping we don't have the same issue as last year, where everyone's battery capacity was draining below 90% a bit too quickly. Now, one of the weirdest bugs was a Wi-Fi bug. If I was connected to my home network, it didn't happen here at the office, but it happened at home. If I was connected to my home network, it would disconnect every 30 to 45 seconds. Basically, it was in a state of limbo of trying to reconnect and then disconnect. And I wasn't able to access the internet or download anything on my phone. The only way to resolve the problem was by rebooting the phone or rebooting the entire network. For some reason, after you leave the house and connect to another network and come back home, the phone would cause these issues. And from what I understand, it was an issue with the 5 gigahertz spectrum on your router and the 160 megahertz band. But if you connected it to the 80 megahertz band on the 5 gigahertz spectrum, everything was okay. Now, thankfully, this problem was resolved with iOS 17.0.2. It hasn't happened since, but it was a really annoying bug to go through. Now, heat was a big topic. A lot of people's iPhones were getting way too hot. It did get hot for me when I first got the phone, but that's because I was setting it up. Like every phone I get into the studio, regardless if it's the Android or iPhone, gets warm and hot when you're setting it up. Maybe the iPhone got a little hotter than usual, but after that, it felt quite normal. Like it didn't feel any hotter than any other device that I've used before. Now, I know some other people had issues with it getting super hot, but it seems Apple has fixed that with one of the previous software updates. So let me know if that's still happening to you. The other thing I should also mention is the fact that the always on display may cause burn-in for you. There have been some reports from the 14 Pro Max where if you left one of the colorful displays on, that you may get burn-in over a year or 2 years of use. My suggestion to you is to use a simple always on display. So like, I don't really have any color showing. Now, I know Apple does a lot of stuff to combat this. So for example, they'll shift pixels around. The fact that it's an LTPO panel and the refresh rate goes from 1 to 120, they can kind of, you know, force the screen not to have that burn in. But, you know, these are OLED displays at the end of the day. So if you can do anything to minimize that effect, my suggestion is to keep the always on display as simple as possible. Now, I do want to talk about the fine woven case. I've purposely been using it since I got the phone. I'm going to use it for an entire year because I want to see how this case holds up over the long run. Now, so far, there's no rips or tears in the case. So far, the integrity is holding up just fine. I will say though, that this material doesn't feel the best. Like it feels like a cheap suede. But look, it does pick up a lot of dirt. You can see the MagSafe ring is already showing itself. I understand this also pops up on the leather case, but I think it's happening a bit too early. I could also wash it to get rid of all this stuff, but I really want to see how it looks a year from now. I do like the way the sides feel though. You know, like this material feels like leather. It feels like leather, and I don't understand why they didn't make the entire case this specific material. I think a lot more people would appreciate that. But overall, that's how it's holding up so far. But yeah, that's how the iPhone 15 Pro Max has been over a month. You know, it hasn't been perfect. Again, the buggiest iPhone I've used in a very long time, but thankfully a lot of those issues have been fixed with software updates. And it also begs the question that, you know, doesn't matter how much you iterate, and even if the updates are small, sometimes things don't go as planned out of the gate. And sometimes it's good to wait like 2 to 3 weeks from reviewers to see if any problems pop up before rushing in and buying a brand new product. But again, I'm gonna let this be used for the entire year and I'll update you in the future. But I still think like if you're coming from an iPhone 12 or newer, it's obviously not worth the update. If you're coming from an iPhone 11 and earlier, I think this is a great update. But again, it comes down to your battery. If you're using an iPhone 12, if it's suffering a lot and your battery capacity is low, you could replace the battery, but I feel like you should just upgrade instead. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.